And we're talking in this portion of the program about the spike in prescription drug costs with Paul Seegert, a managing partner at PCS Advisors. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
First of all, what is PCS Advisors?
Well, we are a consulting firm. We work with employers to help them gain some transparency around what has become one of their largest expenses, providing health care to their people. We're in a place today where Starbucks spends more on health care than beans, and GM spends more on health care than car parts, and it's gotten out of hand, and drugs are a big cause of that.
Now, I'll grant you that it's not easy making modern drugs. It's not the kind of thing you can Thomas Edison just whip out in your basement. You need a large infrastructure, not only to produce the actual potential drugs, but also you've got to face the fact that, like a baseball hitter, your batting average is not that good. I mean, baseball, if you're a baseball batter and you fail 7 out of 10 times at the plate, you're an all-star. An awful lot of drugs that are developed prove not to work, or if they work, they have unfortunate side effects. And so you've got to be able to absorb the cost of a lot of failure. I'll grant all of that. I've also been told that the patent protection that we grant frequently, there's a certain number of years, I guess like a dozen years or something, whatever, that somebody has the right of patent protection, but the clock doesn't start. The clock starts ticking before the FDA may issue approval. So you might have, let's say, a dozen years, and the FDA may eat up 8 or 9 of that, just waiting to approve something. So I'll grant you that it's not easy knocking out these medical miracles that we pop in our mouths or stick in our arms. Having said that, does that justify inflation way beyond ordinary inflation for drugs?
It really doesn't. When you think about the size of the overall industry, over $1 trillion global industry in drugs, and R&D represents about $60 billion a year. So that's the most common reason given to the American consumer as to why drugs are so expensive, but it's a rather small portion of the dollars that we send to that industry that gets turned around and used to develop new drugs. And it is true, they do spend $2.6 billion each time a new drug gets to market. There is significant investment that goes into it, but we've allowed so much other waste to be attached to the cost of the drugs that, to me, is the real problem. That a lot of we can clean it up and still have that same $60 billion going to R&D, and likely even more if we create a more favorable environment for these manufacturers, because currently they're not the villains that are adding all the waste. They get the most attention in the press, big pharma. Everybody thinks of drug companies and drug manufacturers, but it's lots of other lesser-known middle players that add incredible waste to the system without adding much value.
Now, the research and development cost is, of course, extensive, to be sure. To what extent is the Food and Drug Administration part of the problem? Do they take too long to approve these drugs? Are they too picky? I mean, a lot of people I know would answer that by going back to a name that came up several decades ago. Many people may not remember it, but thalidomide was a drug that was supposed to be very beneficial. I forget now even what for, of course, and it was okayed in Europe before it was okayed here. And what happened was that it became a drug known as creating fatal birth defects in children. And so I think a lot of people at that time said, well, we told you, we at the Food and Drug Administration, we weren't going to rush into this like the Europeans did, and look what happened. So you tell me, is the Food and Drug Administration too picky and or too slow? Do they contribute to this problem?
Well, I think the industry would definitely complain about the amount of time that it takes to get drugs through. But to your point, when we see one get through that doesn't have the backing or leads to problems, then then they get a lot of fingers pointed at them. You can look at a recent example, Aduhelm, an Alzheimer's drug that they approved, and they're going to give them years to do trials that confirm it's actually effective at treating Alzheimer's. There's none of the research leading up to its approval showed that it either slowed or the development of Alzheimer's or cured it. And yet, at the price tag of $100,000 per person that we put on this drug, it's allowed to get approval. We have 6 million people on Medicare primarily that have Alzheimer's, and you start to pull out your calculator and do some math, it's potentially catastrophic from a cost standpoint to the system, and there doesn't seem to be justification for it. So I think their track record's spotty.
All right. Now, how did Operation Warp Speed manage to produce highly effective COVID vaccines in record time? How did they apparently get around at least part of this problem?
Well, I think getting the spotlight on the situation and a lot of encouragement from the administration and even a little bit of embarrassment from our counterparts in the UK who worked very closely with the pharmaceutical companies to share data in real time as these drugs were being developed. So it was more of a partnership approach between government and industry, as opposed to the normal route where it's industry that they then bring it to the government after for approval. This was more collaborative, and that may be a good model for getting these things to market more quickly. I agree.
1-866-50-JIMBO, our number, 1-866-505-4626, as we talk with Paul Seegert, managing partner of PCS Advisors, online at their name, PCSadvisors.com. And we're taking a look at the spiking cost of drugs. To what extent are the Europeans, principally, and other foreign countries to blame here? A lot of countries, I gather, simply set a price that a drug can't go beyond. And they're big markets. The drug companies can't ignore them. And so they say, well, okay, we'll just dump all these extra costs of R&D and profit onto the Americans. They don't have such a rule. Couldn't we solve a lot of this problem by simply saying that no drug sold in the United States can be sold cheaper overseas? That if that's the price overseas, it's the price here. And force the drug companies to charge everybody a fair price and let the Europeans stop being parasites and start paying their fair share of research and development, profit, and what have you.
I think that's very sensible, and I think the average American would agree with that. It's only because we have such very successful precision giving, political giving, on the part of donors in that industry, that we don't see stuff like that happening. I really was excited when we started to see that conversation coming up in the prior administration, and there was even some rules that were set to potentially go into effect in that way. But when the new administration came in, they put everything on pause, and the reason for that was to investigate and make sure it was really going to be good for the economy and for the American people, and then, not surprisingly, a lot of those things have gone by the wayside. And
I don't understand why not surprisingly. I mean, other than the fact that the drug companies were making a killing and they found Americans to be patsies, I don't see why that was not extremely possible to do. And the Democrats, quite frankly, could use some good news right now. I would think that for a party in such disarray as they are, they would embrace this and run with it. Or are they that much beholden to the political contributions of the pharmaceutical industry?
Well, that's what it boils down to, unfortunately. If you look up, and it's not hard to do, if folks listening in were to Google who are the largest recipients of political donations from Big Pharma, it absolutely swings with whoever's in power. And if you and then you think about what you're seeing in the news and who's standing up and saying, hey, I'm not sure about this, we want to protect R&D, and they're giving whatever the reasons are, but they are simply keeping it status quo. It's what generally happens. I mean, when you look at the Build Back Better Act and what's included in there, there are some things in that are targeting or attempting to make some improvements in this area of our economy. But they're really, when you look at it, it's a wonderful deal for the industry. They're looking at chopping 3 to 5% of their revenue. Only $128 billion in 10 years, and we're talking about $1 trillion plus a year industry. So they can get a good press event and say, hey, we're going to do these things to rein in drug prices, but they're not really chipping away at it much. And a lot of it doesn't even go into effect until 2025.
Oh, well, that's addressing it with a sense of urgency. All right, more to come with our guest, Paul Seegert. He is managing partner at PCS Advisers.com. We're looking at prescription drug prices. 1-866-50-JIMBO is our number. 1-866-505-4626, and we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. We're talking about prescription drug prices and doing so with a healthcare consultant, managing partner at PCSadvisors.com, Paul Seegert. To what extent can better shopping help alleviate this burden? That is to say, action not necessarily by government, but by the individual. For example, we frequently hear about buying our drugs overseas and how this will be so much cheaper. And, of course, I'm sure many of us have wondered, well, do we have any guarantees that go with that FDA approval that these drugs are in fact safe and effective? I mean, your thoughts about international shopping?
Well, there's some obstacles to being able to do that successfully. It's becoming a little easier, but you're getting the very same drug. When you think about many of these drugs are manufactured in one facility and then sent all around the world. So it's not that you're getting a lesser quality issue. If it's a drug that's approved here, that very same drug is going to be coming here or going there. The reason they might limit access or make it more difficult for consumers to do it is because of really just protecting this industry. Where 80% of global profits are made here on the American consumer, to kind of the point you were making prior to the break. They're going to fight hard to protect that, and they've got some rules in place that they've set up. I often say this industry pretty much self-regulates because of the power of lobbying, and I'll give you a quick example of how that works and how it prevents the American consumer from doing what they're really good at and consuming, given good information. If you're a pharmacy and you take insurance, you don't get to determine what a fair cash price is for you to sell that drug to somebody who chooses not to use insurance. So you have to use a cash price that's dictated by the industry. So I mean, a quick example of that is montelukast. It's a generic asthma drug or allergy drug for singular. And if you take insurance, you have to tell someone at the counter that the cash price is $400 for a 90-day supply, and if they use their insurance, maybe it's going to be $25 for a 90-day supply, when in all reality, if you go to one of the very few pharmacies that does not take insurance, they can sell you that drug for $34.50 for an entire year. So we have a serious...
And still make money. And still make money.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, that gives you a rough idea of the price markup here. You know, I've never understood this whole notion of intimidation by campaign contribution. My tendency, politicians, for example, want to be reelected. And so there's only so much, you know, that if you're given money, there's only so much that money can do. And if you're being given, let's say, money by, let's say the mafia or the drug cartels of South America, that's the kind of thing that can be exposed, and all the money in the world is not going to get you reelected. And as a practicing politician, which I'm not, but if I were, I would tell these people, you go right ahead and you give that money to my opponent, and I'll broadcast that fact 24/7, and I'll get reelected, and you will have wasted your money. Get used to it. You're going to live in the real world. Now, I think that not only is good policy, but good politics. This notion that whoever gives you the most money is a winning path. You know, if I'm an incumbent and I'm taking this ton of money, and any opponent with an ounce of brains is going to point out the incumbent, Jim Bohannon over there, he's taking all this money from the drug companies. No wonder nothing's being done. I don't get it. I mean, to me, that would be the kiss of death, all that drug money.
You would think, but they're able to give it in such ways. Some of it is easily known and some of it is not.
Well, it's easily known if you tell people about it. My opponent is getting this money. Here's where and here's how.
Sure.
I mean, I expect politicians, Paul, I expect politicians to be cowards, okay? I don't expect them to be stupid. And there's nothing cowardly about this. This is it doesn't take courage. I mean, all you have to do is point out that your opponent is getting all this money to keep drug prices high. You ought to skate home to victory. You ought to be able to be a pedophile and still win election that way. That message should resonate. Everybody needs prescription drugs of one kind or another. Or if you don't, you're going to.
Right.
Well,
I mean,
again, I just don't understand it. I mean, people are
true.
I just don't get it. I mean, all you have to do is point this out. Anybody taking that money, I would think that their opponent would automatically point that out, and it would be a winning issue. You
would think, but they have just created such momentum, I think, in giving pretty equally on both sides. They've succeeded, at least to this point. And if this Build Back Better, if it kind of continues in the form that it is today, and actually, gets to the finish line, they're going to be largely unscathed. And they've done a really good job. I think the bad actors in the industry have done a really good job of getting everyone to talk about R&D, manufacturers. They're the bad guys or the good guys, depending on which side of the conversation you're on, when really these middle players, pharmacy benefit managers, who were originally, they were designed to be an expert that could advocate on behalf of payers, behalf of consumers, to make sure we all did not get mistreated. And now when you look at what's happening, they are adding, their revenue can exceed the revenue of manufacturers.
Well, it's high time they were scathed.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Yeah.
I mean, I
can't believe that we are all that stupid. I mean, I know that that's the idea, is that the pharmaceutical companies figure we're all that stupid. But I have no idea that we actually are. I mean, if you're paying that kind of price and you are informed that that price is artificially inflated and you shouldn't have to be deciding whether or not to pay for Granny's heart medication or the monthly rent, when it doesn't have to be that way, that would motivate me to vote. And, of course, I don't need motivation. I vote every time anyway. But if, let's say, I were a marginal voter, that would get me to the polls.
I agree. And I think that's why I'm excited to be on your show talking about this, because I just think the average consumer, when I talk to consumers, most of them have never heard of a pharmacy benefit manager. When they think big pharma, they think manufacturers, and they're the enemy. When these pharmacy benefit managers, if you look at insulin as a quick example of how they're impacting the system, and what they're doing is saying, yes, the drug can be on the formulary, it can be on the drug list for your health plan, and here's what your copay is, and a little bit more, but not a ton. And if you look at insulin, they're adding your health plan today for Humalog. Eli Lilly makes Humalog most commonly prescribed insulin, and it's just an easy example for me to pull out of my mind. Your plan's paying about $550 a month for that. $330 of it is being added in fees by these pharmacy benefit managers, 60% of the total. Their whole reason for existing was to help us make sure the consumer would get a good value. Obviously, we're very far off track when they're adding 60% to the total cost, and they're supposed to be there to get us value.
Well, we'll come back and we'll talk some more about that with our guest, Paul Seegert, managing partner of PCS Advisors and healthcare consultant. And we'll be back. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Are you happy with the cost of the prescription drugs you pay? That's a rhetorical question. I think that very few people would be. And we're getting some straight answers tonight from Paul Seegert. He is a healthcare consultant and managing partner at PCSadvisors.com. We're looking at the problems and possible solutions. Now, explain more, if you would, about this pharmacy benefit manager role. I've not heard that term before. Who has these managers, and what are they supposed to be doing?
Yeah, they are originally they were designed, or they were kind of invented so that they would advocate on behalf of payers, on behalf of consumers, on behalf of health plans, on behalf of Medicare, the biggest purchaser of drugs in the world. They would have this go-between who would go out there and source drugs for them and negotiate on their behalf. But they were allowed to operate in secrecy, largely, and with a very kind way to say it would be that there's a serious lack of transparency. There was a recent article in Becker's Hospital Review, and it said PBM's profits are increasing while their revenue sources remain unclear. Amazingly, we have a player in our healthcare system that accounts for, let's just call it $500 billion in cost that's buried inside of our pharmacy costs that we all pay for being a middle player. And we don't all get to know that easily how they're generating that revenue. For some of us that work inside it every day, we have a good read on that, but the average consumer doesn't even know that they exist. And they're
name a name. Who is it? Who is it who's doing this?
Optum would be one. That's, I think, the largest. CVS, Caremark. There's been a lot of consolidation as well recently in our business. Express Scripts would be another. Those three, they control about 70% of this market that accounts for about $500 billion. So they're bringing in.
That's the problem. We have an economic oligarchy here. In a real marketplace, if you would look at a bunch of companies that are all making excessive profits, even given their admittedly high inherent expenses, but still making excessive profits, and let's say they're charging $200 per milligram of widget here, and I could charge $100 and still make a happy profit, then I would come in, I would start doing this, I would undercut my opponents, and I'd still make a fortune. I would drive them out of business, or more likely make them cut their costs back to something reasonable. That's the whole point of a market economy. That's the Econ 101 first week stuff. I mean,
that's right.
And, is it that hard to enter this market? I mean, how come we do not have a market? How come we have this economic oligarchy where I don't know that you have outright under the table price fixing, but you have what amounts to it?
You do certainly get that as a result. And the reason, and there are 300 of these pharmacy benefit managers or so. Most of them are small players. You have 3 that represent 70% of the market and 297 that are clawing at the 30%. And the reason it's remained so static is because if you follow the money, that 30 to 60% that's being added to the cost of prescriptions by these pharmacy benefit managers, added to the cost of the high dollar prescriptions, that is. But if you follow those dollars, all the players, the oligarchy of insurers that we have, if you go back 11 years ago, the Affordable Care Act kicks in, and it's whittled it down to today, where we have the Blues, United, Cigna, Aetna, Humana, and then a couple of HMOs that have made some inroads. But for the most part, we're down to 5 insurers that handle this whole country's health care. And they are aligned with their favorite pharmacy benefit manager. And they have if I were to describe it in a real simple way, they have an agreement with the insurer can go to the pharmacy benefit manager and say, look, I'll allow you to overcharge the members in my health plans for their drugs, so long as I can have a profit-sharing arrangement with you outside of the accounting of those plans. So they end up having a profit-sharing arrangement or revenue-sharing arrangement with the insurers. So that keeps it status quo.
So the people who are supposed to be watching out for the consumer, the part of this plan, they are essentially stabbing the people they're supposed to be protecting, stabbing on the back.
Without a doubt, absolutely right. And nobody steps forward to drive these people out. I mean, again, if I'm part of a plan and I discovered that's the situation, I'm going to rebel. I'm going to attend my union's convention or whatever the thing is that controls this. And I'm going to say, change, or we'll get rid of you. There is some positive news. There are employers that are taking this thing by the horns and saying, look, this is unreasonable. And so they'll work with an innovative consultant, and they'll engage one of the other 297 pharmacy benefit managers that are clawing at that 30%. They'll get their services in place instead of one of these bigger PBMs that is really designed to add cost and add waste. But it's picking up momentum. But it's taken a lot longer than you would expect because we don't have the transparency to have the free market forces like you described earlier in this industry. It's coming I mean, it's so much less transparent than you would expect. As just an American consumer, we have this perception that we have a free market, and we absolutely do not yet in healthcare, and especially not in the drug space.
Well, again, help me understand why this is true. Is it that expensive to enter in? Is this like becoming a big tech player, that it's prohibitively expensive?
No, I don't think that it's that expensive. It's that every single person that's involved, working, say, with an employer to advocate for them, or in theory, supposed to be advocating for that employer in their health plan, every single person in the mix is profiting from the waste. That's what has to get resolved. I mean, and we need more transparency around that. When the insurer makes money from the waste that's being added to the cost of the drugs, the pharmacy benefit manager makes literally hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue adding waste to the cost of drugs. The national consultants, they're supposed to be the brokerages out there that are supposed to be advocating for employers when they're profiting from the waste that's attached to the cost of the drugs. The third-party administrators that manage large self-funded plans are getting kickbacks from these pharmacy benefit managers. All these players in the system are so well compensated by these pharmacy benefit managers that it's led to a very static situation.
Let's say it. They're bribed.
Yes. Absolutely.
Aren't there laws against this? I mean, it sounds like what you're describing ought to be illegal, is it?
No. But it sure as heck should be.
But it's not. Why doesn't some hotshot politician pick up with this and run? I mean, I can't imagine why a politician of either party wouldn't be thrilled. Wow, you've just handed me a red-hot ticket for re-election. I don't get it. Why are they not falling over each other?
I say,
take your pharmaceutical political contributions, give them to my opponent. I will tar and feather him with your contributions. In the meantime, I'm going to get reelected.
Or unseat the person.
Or unseat an incumbent. Either way. I mean,
you would think. You would think.
You would think. 1-866-50-JIMBO. 1-866-505-4626. You happy with the prices you're paying for prescription drugs? More to come with Paul Seegert of PCSAdvisors.com in just a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, as we talk with Paul Seegert, a healthcare consultant and partner of PCSAdvisors.com. Jacob in San Jose, California. Good evening, Jacob.
Yes, Paul and Jim, President Trump, when he was in office, he decided to go to an insider, Daniel Best, the pharmaceutical longtime insider, to help him as a drug czar to lower prescription drug prices. But one morning in Washington, D.C., where he lived, I think he lived like on about a 10-floor story apartment in Washington, D.C., he was found with multiple blunt force trauma, and he was deceased. He seemed to have suffered a fatal adverse reaction to lowering prescription drug prices. Was there ever any more factual conclusion as to why he had to be found deceased and couldn't complete his task?
Did anybody ever, in fact, tie this to the drug industry, Paul Seegert?
I don't believe so. And, I'm not... I can't really speak to that, but it doesn't. I mean, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but this is a massive industry, so it's not going to change without a serious fight.
That's a pretty serious way to fight. I mean, you're talking heavy. We know that's against the law, if in fact that were the case. But yeah, all right. We'll leave that one as an open case, I guess. Kevin in Naples, Florida. Good evening. Put another way, hello, Kevin in Naples, Florida.
Hi, Jim. Sorry for the delay there. Great insight by your guest tonight. I wanted to talk about, in the overall healthcare system, it seems to me that the hospitals are the bigger problem at over 30% of our healthcare spend. I recently had a heart surgery / procedure, the doctor called it a procedure, but as much as it hurt during the procedure, it was clear to me it was a surgery. Little attempt at humor there, not a good one probably.
No, but, the point was well taken. Euphemisms are often used to hide things like cost. So point taken, Kevin. Go ahead.
Thanks. The cost was originally submitted to me as about $21,000, and I sat down with the consultant in advance of the surgery, and I was told that my insurance company would cover about 90% of it, and I would cover the remaining $2,000, which I paid up front. After the surgery, a letter arrived saying that the total costs were an additional $73,000, despite the fact that there was nothing extra in the surgery. An
additional $73,000 for what?
$73,000. So I asked, first of all, what is going to happen with that charge? They gladly advised me that my insurance company, who is Aetna, had paid the amount in full, and that I asked for a detailed bill for the charges, and they said they would send it to me, but it would take about a week. And I still haven't gotten it, and here we are about a week and a half later. So something these costs that the hospitals are charging, it's impossible to nail it down in advance, and it gets out of hand very quickly.
Well, of course, in this day and age of Christmas mailings and the like and slow mail delivery, I'm not sure that a week and a half is necessarily a prolonged delivery time, but I'll defer to Paul Seegert as to your problem. Certainly the fact that figuring out hospital expenses and charges is virtually impossible. Paul?
Well, it definitely is, and you're right. It's another big problem in our system. You have this transparency rule that was supposed to kick in actually as part of the original Affordable Care Act, one of the good parts, and they fought it in the courts for 11 years. They don't want to have to publish their pricing and be subject to free market forces, just like the pharmaceutical part of the industry does not.
Well, that's too bad that they don't want it. I mean, again, the public wants them to be held accountable, and again, the public would flock to a politician that did this. I mean, this idea of they don't like it, the hell with you. We don't care whether you like it or not. I mean, I don't get this.
Check this out. It ties into our whole conversation. You have this hospital industry that fought against the transparency rule. They finally lose. Under the prior administration, they lost. And January 1, they're supposed to be publishing their pricing for 300 common procedures. Here we are almost to the next year. We're in December of 21. Only 6% of hospitals are truly complying. They don't want the average consumer
What was the or else clause when they were told to comply? Comply or else what?
Or else, since the lobbying is so effective in this industry, you'll have to pay $300 a day in a fine for noncompliance.
Well, then the fines ought to go up. I mean, don't charge piddly fines, and the fines ought to go up.
All right. They're not big enough to matter.
Well, they're big enough to matter if you want to be reelected. Peter in Williston, Vermont. Good evening.
Good evening, Jimbo, and thank you for taking the phone call, and thank you for your guest. You know, the first phone call that you had out of the break was an eye-opener, to say the least. I just want to mention a few things. It seems, if you see TV, most of the commercials, the majority of them seem to be big pharma, whether it's the national news, whether it's sports, and it seems that, to me, most of the adults and perhaps generations have been preconditioned and brainwashed in believing those things. So I think it would be difficult for any politician to say otherwise and garner a majority of the votes. It just hasn't happened. And one of the first things I do if I had the chance of being president of the United States is shut down K Street.
The entire lobbying industry. Well, I'll put it this way: there is such a thing known as the First Amendment, and while I'll grant you that many excesses come out of K Street in Washington, that is to say, the home of many of these lobbying groups, the fact is you can't just shut them down because we do have a First Amendment, and it does apply. Now, excesses you can deal with. Shutting them down, Paul Seegert, I don't think would work, and it wouldn't, in fact, be constitutional.
Right, but we should have transparency enough to put a spotlight on the fact that, like the hospital rule that we were talking about, when you have a hospital that has a multi-billion-dollar balance sheet, who cares about a $300 a day fine? It clearly
exactly. The fines have to be realistic.
To do anything.
I mean, the fines. Yeah. The fine shouldn't be based on a dollar amount. It should be based on X percent of your net worth, or X percent of your profits for the preceding year, something of that nature. I mean, that's ridiculous. You know, why not just fine Bill Gates $300? Why not fine Bill Gates $300,000? I mean,
exactly.
I mean, that is begging people to ignore. The point of this is not to raise the $300. The point is to change behavior, and that won't change their behavior. All right, more to come. 1-866-50-JIMBO. Back in a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show with our guest, Paul Seegert, managing partner at PCS Advisors.com and healthcare consultant. And Bridget calls in from Galesburg, Illinois. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
I have been a diabetic for 52 years. I became a diabetic out of the clear blue sky. No one in my family has ever had it. And I was in a coma for 3 days and came out of the coma the day the men landed on the moon. So it's been a long journey for me. My parents sent me to school in Lake Forest with $35 a month for my 2 bottles of insulin and 3 bags of syringes. There were disposable syringes at that time. And
so suffice it to say you've had a difficult financial and physical time of it. Okay, how does that relate to what we're talking about?
Well, the big thing is that now the same insulin I'm taking, made by the same company who started making it, is $345 a bottle versus probably $5 or $6 50 years ago.
Versus $345 a bottle versus $5 or $6 for what?
A bottle.
No. You're saying that? Are you saying that the bottle that you pay $345 to get could be had for $5 or $6?
53 years ago, yes, it could.
Oh, 53 years ago, okay. I think that's a lot more than 53 years worth of inflation. I'd like our guest to comment about that.
Well, one of the issues that we face is that during that same stretch of time, these pharmacy benefit managers have added more and more cost to the cost of these drugs, and insulin has been a big, one of the worst examples of it. I mentioned it earlier, but they account for the cost added to your insulin by these pharmacy benefit managers that, for the most part, most Americans have never heard of. It accounts for 60% of the total cost. And it is a sick state of affairs that we have. You're now at a place where a retired couple has to have $300,000 in savings to cover medical expenses. Lots of those dollars will go to pharmaceuticals, will go to drugs, and it's massively inflated, and it shouldn't be. And we've got to get to that free marketplace that we've talked about.
We certainly send our sympathies to you, Bridget, and maybe some of what we've talked about tonight, if actually adopted by the government, might prove to make things a little easier for you. But good luck to you. We, as they say, feel your pain. And thank you very much. Stay on the line, Paul, and we'll speak off air. Paul Seegert is the managing partner at PCS Advisors.com. He is a healthcare consultant and has been offering us an inside look, as unsavory as it is, an inside look into just how drug prices are manipulated. I'm Jim Bohannon, and this is Westwood One.